Hey guys, this is Tim. I'm going to try to record a lecture online. We'll see how I do. I know this is a new medium for both of us, but here it goes. Conformity and deviance. Take one. Conformity. You know what conformity is. It's matching your behavior to other people. It's like you match your feelings, your behavior, your thoughts. We're writing an election year. You can understand that. So there's different factors that influence conformity, and these first four things are pretty easy. Number one, the bigger the group, the more conformity. That just makes sense. Bigger crowds exert more peer pressure. Stanley Milgram did these weird experiments in New York City, and what he would do is he would go around, he would just stare up into the sky. Now, if he went alone, not many people who were passing by on the street would stop and stare to see what he was looking at. But if you brought a certain number of friends, and you can see right around here, if I can get this pen to work, about five, then most of the passersby would do the same behavior. So we're like these flocks or herds, and in a certain critical mass, about five of us, then we will start to conform. Okay, unanimity is the second factor. That basically means we're all in agreement. Now, if everyone is wearing a blue shirt right here, then they're all in agreement. But if one guy sticks out, it starts to break the unanimity. And so non unanimous groups are less conforming than unanimous groups. This leads right into factor number three, which is cohesiveness. Cohesiveness has to do with how tight knit a group is. What does that mean? Well, think about military groups right here or gangs. They don't allow for a lot of deviance. If you're in the Crips, you can't wear the Bloods colors. And so there are strict rules about conforming in these cohesive type of. The last factor is prior commitment. This one actually reduces conformity. The best example I can give, let me get this pen out of the way, is an umpire. He makes a commitment, a bad call, and even though all of the fans in the stadium are pushing down on him, he won't go against his bad call. He should conform to a big group in this case, but he doesn't. I hope that makes sense. Okay, we're going to start talking about conformity in more detail. I gave those four early factors, but if I come back to conformity, I'm going to talk about people as flocks or herds or even tribes that come together and how they influence one another. I love this quote from Nietzsche on the tribe. You can see it right here where he says you have to separate yourself from the tribe. And this is why I'm a social psychologist, especially why I talk about Jonathan Livingston Seagull in my other class. He had to separate from the flock to find his true destiny, to come back to the flock. Okay, I'm going to start with Bib Latané, 1981. He had this theory about conformity that as the group gets bigger and bigger, they have more impact on one person within the group. I have this definition right down here. What does this mean? Well, let's say stage fright, for instance. If you go to give a speech to a group of five people, maybe your stage fright's not that high. But 500, your stage fright gets multiplied because the group is bigger and bigger. Now, the flip side of the coin is this. As a group grows bigger and bigger, and this is the more important one to me, an individual has less and less impact over the group. I think I have the definition down here again. Well, what does that mean? Well, this preacher thing up here. They would follow preachers around, and when they give sermons to really big crowds, fewer people come down to give their life to Christ. In smaller crowds, a greater percentage of the crowd comes to give their life to Christ. And here's the catch. In a smaller crowd, you have more impact on the group. It seems more intimate. That's why when you see a band in a small crowd, you feel special because it feels like you have a connection. And this is why I teach at Scottsdale Community College, because small class sizes, I can connect with you. Laban talked about like how crowds or groups are kind of mobs. Just think about the French Revolution. And so I want to talk a little bit about this group mentality or mob psychology, because when we talk about conformity, we are kind of talking about mobs. Now, what the autokinetic effect, sorry about that, by Musafer Sharif is that he would put people in a dark room and they would shine this little red light. And what happens is it's an optical illusion. It appears to move, but it really doesn't. Now, when you're alone, you'll say left, right, up, down, all these different things. But when you're with a group of people, you start agreeing on the direction of the light. Now, if we conform to directions of light, we conform to many other things as well. Okay, this is one of the most famous experiments out there. In 1951, Solomon Asch did this experiment. What he would do is he would show this line on the left. I don't know if you can see it, and then these three lines on the right. All you have to do is pick out the line on the right that matches the line on the left. Here's the kicker. Either you do it alone or in a group. And in the group, they would have six actors or confederates that would go along with Milgram. Oh, sorry, Ash. Go along with Ash. And then one real subject. So they kind of, these accomplices were stacked like this in the blue shirts. And you have the one real guy in the orange here, I think. And so on the first few rounds, they would say the correct line. Like here, it would be number one because I made it number one, I think. Here would be, I think, number two because I made it number two, and so on and so forth. But about the third time in, and 12 out of the 18 times, they would pick the incorrect line. They would say, in this case, for instance, one. And they would go down the line, one, 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 one. And when it came to be your turn, they wanted to see if you would conform and say the wrong line at least once. And here's what they found. That over 75% of the people would pick the wrong line one or more times. That means they would conform with what the group was saying, the incorrect response of the group, even though they probably knew privately in their heart that this was wrong. And this leads to the two reasons that we conform. Deutsch and Girard in 1955 says one reason is normative influence. This is what I think is going on in the Ash study. We just conform so that we're not a weirdo. The second reason is informational influence. This is when we conform because we're a true believer. So the first one is more phony, normative, and sometimes it's called compliance. I have this little Adolf Hitler thing down here. A lot of people in Nazi Germany were conforming just because they didn't want to get hurt. I don't want to be sticking out. I don't really believe in the Nazi Party, but I don't want bad things to happen to me. That's compliance. But a lot of people really bought into what Adolf Hitler was saying. And so this is internalization. I conform to the group because I truly believe. Okay, here I am back again. One more study that has to do with conformity is Schachter 1951. This is really famous too. This is what I call the jury study. Why? Because it was a jury, but it was only 8 people instead of 12 people. And so they sat around talking. And what Schachter would do is send in 3 kinds of actors, and I have them down here. The modal, he told, I want you to go into the group and just be a conformer. So modal, always go along with the majority. The deviate, just like it sounds. Whatever the group does, you be the deviate. Go against the group. And then finally, you have the flip-flopper in the middle, the slider. He starts out against the group, and then he conforms. So he deviates, then he conforms. That's why he called him the slider. So if I can show it to you this way, the orange are the real people, and the blue are the 3 actors. One of the things that he found is that the real people didn't talk very much to the modal. Why? Because he already blended in, he already agreed with them. But these 2 guys are problem children, the slider and the deviate. So they started to pressure and communicate a lot with these 2 people. They put a lot of pressure on the slider, and eventually I told him to cave in. And then he blended in, came to his senses, and the group kind of stopped talking to him as much. All their attention now became focused on the deviant, but I told him to dig his heels in, and eventually what the group does, sorry group, is to excommunicate him, which the modern term for that is called ghosting. And I hate ghosting. I hate getting ghosted, but ghosting is what they were doing in this experiment. So, what did he conclude out of this experiment? That groups like you to go along, they want you to be the same. And when you don't, they ghost you in some way. Now, sometimes it's just verbal ostracism, Other times it's physical pain, torture, hurt. You can come into my other classes and I go into more detail about that. Especially about 1984, I used to teach about this a lot. And I love this quote: Winston, you are a flaw in the pattern. You must be eradicated. It's like we like everything to be uniform in the society of. One last note about groups and conformity before we move on to deviance is social comparison theory. So, in social comparison theory, we have this natural drive, according to Leon Festinger, to compare our abilities and our attitudes with other people. And this is especially true whenever the truth becomes unclear. When it becomes unclear, we're really motivated to go to the group and say, what is the truth? Like if you're in math class and your math teacher asks you, what is 2 plus 2? You don't go ask the group. But usually the problems are a lot harder in your math class. And so you have to seek out others to get validation for, did I get the right answer? Now, think about which hives do you pick? Well, usually you don't pick very dissimilar hives. You're going to pick hives that are like you. I talk about this in my religion class. If I'm Christian folk, maybe I don't go into the Judaic hive or the vice versa, the Muslim hive, etc., because I want to be around like-minded bees. The only problem with this is that it exaggerates these pre-existing notions, which we already all believe. Why? Because we're similar bees. So this leads into social reality, especially important for your project, because if you have these cults, groups, hives coming together, they're already alike, then when they compare attitudes, exchange information, they're comparing out of the same set of information. It strengthens their pre-existing beliefs. Like Louise Nevelson says, all reality is this agreement that we have come upon to make life more livable.